welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. Today, we're talking about the rising tide of republicanism in the Caribbean, an attempt by India's opposition to establish political relevance, and some developments from the field of Olympic sport. Queen Elizabeth II died recently, and there was the expected wave of obituaries and homage. However, in many countries that were once ruled by the British, the occasion was also a moment to reflect on the damage caused by colonialism. One of these areas was the Caribbean. In November last year, Barbados declared itself a republic, and such sentiments are strong in other countries as well. We have with us Anish for more. Welcome to the show, Anish. So, there have been demands of reassessing the role of monarchy in recent years within the countries of the Caribbean. And what can you tell us about this?
So obviously, in the more recent years, we have seen questions of racial justice taking prominence in politics of many of the Caribbean island nations. And this obviously comes at a time and world over, we are seeing racial justice movements, not just and this is especially prominent in the neighborhood that the Caribbeans are in the United States itself. And that is where the role of the British monarchy, having the status of being the head of state of many of these nations, comes in. And that's where many of these countries are talking about whether it is appropriate to continue to have a colonial authority as their primary head, the first citizen, whatever it be, and also rule over them and have their governments in the name of that colonial legacy. Recently, last year, we saw Barbados becoming a new republic, and there are similar movements in Bahamas, in Belize, in Jamaica itself. So all of them, in Jamaica, even there are polls that show that an overwhelming majority of the people there are demanding or support moves or calls for republicanism, and there's already a process in place there. Largely descendants of slaves that were brought in during the British Empire, and many of them really just want their conditions to change, not only their political conditions, but also for history to reckon with the fact that grave injustices have been done on people, especially the African origin people of the Caribbean. And that really needs to change. They're also calling for reparations and other sorts of demands that are quite, there's something that is now a major debate in post-colonial literature and anti-colonial literature, so to speak, actually. So this definitely is a movement that is now coming to fore, considering how many statements have been made by opposition leaders, by progressive groups and movements in not only the Caribbean, but around the world.
These demands are not just limited within the region, they go far beyond that. So, what are the demands like of some of the radical movements from across the world?
Well, reparations, as I said, reparations are at the center of these debates right now. And that is primarily because the colonial system was not just one country ruling over another. It is a system of capitalist loot that created many of these capitalist nations in the West to begin with. And it is the colonial loot that actually created some of the biggest landmarks even today. And it is this loot that sustains a large part of their economy even to this day. We had Utsa Patnaik give us the estimate that about $45 trillion worth of today's worth of loot has been taken out of India in the nearly 2 centuries of colonial rule that the British had in India. And that shows, this is just one country, obviously it's a big country, but that shows the level of loot that has happened across the country. And the British Empire that controlled at one point a quarter of the world really has a bigger say in it. And some of these nations are settler colonial nations like Australia, Canada, that have their own history of genocide and theft of indigenous lands. And obviously, that also needs to be reckoned with. These questions are going to come to forth. We already are seeing indigenous activists talking about the role of the new monarch. Like obviously, Queen Elizabeth had her own kind of charisma that actually kept many of these questions at bay. But right now, with the same kind of loyalty not being evident with, say, the new King Charles III, we can definitely look at the republicanism debate and debates about the history of colonialism and the need for reparations for this history to be reckoned with coming back in the mainstream.
Thank you for that update, Anish. We go to India next, which for many years has been dominated at every level by the Bharatiya Janata Party and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The main opposition party is the Indian National Congress, which has been plagued by lack of direction and leadership for years now. Now, one of the leaders of the Congress, Rahul Gandhi, has launched the Bharat Jodo Yatra. The rally, which is set to cover India, seeks to present an alternative vision for the country. But can the Congress, which is quite weak at this point, actually achieve this ambitious agenda? We have with us NewsClick's Pragya to talk about this. Hi Pragya, so the Bharat Jodo Yatra, what is this rally that's going to, supposedly unite the country? Can you tell us a little bit about the slogans and the agenda behind this march?
Hi, Shreya. So yes, the Congress Party is basically India's biggest opposition party, and it has launched a march of over 3,700 kilometers. They're starting from the southernmost tip of India and heading to its northernmost end in Kashmir. So they're calling it Bharat Jodo, or the march to join India, or the journey to join India. We have to remember, first of all, that a march, a walkathon of sorts in politics has a very deep symbolism in India. For the Congress Party, in fact, the Congress Party has been told many times to have exactly such a walkathon, to literally walk in order to build its constituency. There's a feeling that the Congress Party, its leaders, very often don't connect with the people as they once used to, and that a march would help solve this for many Indians. The moment you talk about a march across the country, across its many states, you're talking about traversing the diversity of the country, traversing the language, the religions, the regions, the food, the cuisine, the various aspects which the founding fathers of the nation, which included the leaders of the Congress Party, had felt that, keep India together, the so-called idea of India. One of the things which people will immediately perhaps connect with is the historical reference to the 1930 Dandi March. At that time, India was a colony of the British Empire. And coming out of the Great Depression, the British were sort of desperate to both repress Indians and also to extract as much as they could out of it. So the challenge for the Congress Party will be to remind people, or to make them believe, that a similar situation exists today, and that the ruling BJP is the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, which is a right-wing nationalist party, is doing something similar to what the what happened to to Indians during the British rule. That will actually be its foremost challenge.
And since we talked about Congress and being the main opposition party, could you also tell us a little bit about the internal challenges that Congress faces?
Yes, of course. So the Congress, like I said, has struggled to connect with people. There is a perception that the Congress Party is ruling from, or trying to conduct its politics on Twitter, on social media. That the top leadership, they've struggled to hold an election for the party positions, which just sends the signal that they're perhaps not as serious as they ought to be about the challenges they face. The primary challenge, of course, is the ruling party, the BJP, which has been winning in multiple states. Where they have not won, they have used their money power, or other forms of coercive techniques to win over the state governments. So this is the biggest challenge for the Congress. The internal challenges are related to this broader picture. The issue for the Congress is also that there have been measures by this government, like demonetization, or the way it implemented the GST in India, or the way it managed the COVID pandemic. Now, all of these can be seen as policy failures, right? They tried to do something and it didn't work out the way they can easily say, we tried to do something, it just didn't work out. But there is a larger picture here of democracy at threat. There is a larger picture here of the relationship between different communities of India also getting fraught due to the right-wing majoritarian politics of this government. So the challenge for the Congress party will be to ensure that its leaders do not try to espouse a softer version of what the BJP does in order to gain access to power. The other challenge will be, of course, to use this yatra to demonstrate that they can actually win an election or two in the provincial elections which are coming. But for now, the present challenge for the Congress party is to complete this rally, which will coincide with a couple of state or provincial elections, and to show that they're fighting for a better economy, fighting for a better future for people, for more jobs, and so on. So that's what's going to be on their agenda.
Thank you, Pragya, for being with us on the show today. And we're continuing with India, but this time in the realm of sports. Recently, India's Football Federation was suspended for a while over governance issues, and now it is the turn of the country's Olympic Association to face such a threat. The International Olympic Committee has asked the Indian Olympic Association to resolve its issues by December, failing which it will face a ban. We have with us Siddhant Annie for more on this update. Hi Siddhant, glad to have you on this episode. So, can you tell us what are the issues that IOA is facing that has led to the International Olympics Committee to issue such a stern warning?
Thanks, Shreya. Good to be here. So the IOC Executive Board met in Lausanne, its headquarters, on the 8th of September, and the I suppose headlining issue at this meeting was reports on the functioning of various national associations, all of whom are members of the IOC. Guatemala and India are among those who were in a most serious condition, both for similar reasons, which is interference from a third party in their sort of functioning, day-to-day administration. So like we've discussed before on Daily Debrief, India was recently banned by FIFA from participating in international football because of very similar reasons. The Supreme Court of this country had stepped in based on various petitions and other sort of issues regarding how the leadership to these bodies are elected. So in the case of the IOA, how the president of the IOA, a gentleman by the name of Narendra Batra, appointed himself life president when none of that was mandated. So that led to litigation beginning, and a power struggle ensued within the top echelons of leadership of the IOA. So essentially, all of these things come out of power struggles to control the governance of various sports. In the case of the IOA, the entire Olympic movement, for what it's worth, in India. And from that arise, and now that the Supreme Court comes in and says that, no, you can't do this, this is absolutely wrong, and you have to A, listen to the law of the land, and B, India has something called the National Sports Code, so function according to it. Now, when international bodies like the IOC and FIFA, etc., get wind of that, they feel that it's too much government interference in the functioning of what is supposed to be an autonomous body, whose rules are according to the FIFA, or in this case, the Olympic Charter, not necessarily the law of the land in those sort of scenarios. So that's how they take cognizance of what's going on. Usually the complainant has to be from within the Olympic family, as they refer to it. So probably another office bearer or someone who's concerned about what's happening. They go to the IOC, they say this is an issue, and then they investigate and figure it out. What has happened in the interim in India already is that the Supreme Court has backed down from its stance. So this committee of administrators that was appointed to take charge of all aspects of Olympic sports in India has its mandate has been repealed. So that's not going to happen anymore. And the IOA, the Indian Olympic Association itself, will decide how it gets its own house in order. So which means it's highly unlikely that basically any further ban is going to happen on India.
And on that note, Siddhant, so do you think the larger sports administration, the larger scenario of sports administration within India is also in a crisis?
It's an interesting crisis at that, Shreya. Because over the past, let's say, decade or a little bit more, as an entertainment industry, sport has exploded in India. The IPL, the Indian Premier League, which is a cricket tournament, is currently per match among the most expensive or the most expensive television right per game of any sport anywhere in the world. That includes football, etc., etc., with the exception of some games in the National Football League, American football in the US. So there are billions of dollars now that are at play. This wasn't the case in India till very recently, where sport was governed by largely people with political connections, because they are the only one. The state was essentially the sponsor, as it was a more controlled sort of environment. There was no private money flowing in. Now these things are worth a lot of money. So those who have been in sports administration for, let's say, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, spent their entire careers there, are now facing competition from new players who come in with the cash that, let's say, a business empire or massive television rights that they bring in. So these are essentially, for Indian sport, the current power struggles that are going on, where it was once a state-backed and state-sponsored system. Now now the private players are realizing more and more that there's a lot more going on, and they need to have their people in place making the rules so that things are more cohesive, lucrative, etc., etc. So in the garb or whatever of professionalization, etc., etc., essentially a major power struggle is on in all of Indian sport, each and every sport. This is the case for multiple disciplines. Hockey, which was also for a long time controlled by Narendra Batra, who is also the IOA president, is in a similar situation. Archery has for a long time been. And for India, these are all sports that are important from an Olympic perspective, because these are the sports in which we have the chance or potential to win medals. So it's interesting that in a sport like archery, which millions of people don't play, even there are power struggles that are very much on. So yeah, it's a transition phase, and I suppose in those times the crisis is quite widespread.
Thank you so much, Siddhant, for that information. And that's all for today's episode. For more such stories and updates from around the world, keep watching www.peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.